Hello everybody, this will be a short lecture video on the chapter on religion, chapter 14. So I just want to go through and talk about some of the highlights of the chapter that might be important for you to focus on as you get ready for the quiz. So I am using information that's directly from the book, so hopefully that'll be helpful and easier in kind of streamlining your studying. So this is how the textbook defines religion. Just, their basic definition: thoughts, actions, and feelings based on the belief in the existence of spirit beings and supernormal or superhuman forces. And so many times those of us that study religion, we think about the various ways that this is interpreted throughout the world. Belief in the supernatural and looking at above and beyond the forces of nature is something that you find in all cultures all over the world, whether it's tied to spirit beings and ancestors, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, or kind of major monotheistic, formally organized religions like the Judeo-Christian Islamic faiths. We find so many interpretations of these ideas of beliefs that go above and beyond what we can physically see in our physical natural world. So what are beliefs, right? Beliefs are people's ideas of the spirit world. They are ways in which the universe was created and continues to be. So they're interpretations of origin myths and sacred texts. Sometimes we call that mythology. Understanding, our place, where we came to be. Belief is kind of difficult to pinpoint because belief is really based on experience. So individuals that have strong faiths often have interpretations of experiences that they've had, either in a congregation or, you hear of situations where individuals have devoted some offerings or time to, have a prayer be answered. And so it's really hard to pinpoint that experience that you have had with the supernatural, with the spirit world. Anthropologically speaking, understanding religious belief and practice, we can probably go back to one of our early anthro dudes, actually one of those armchair anthropologists, kind of coming full circle here as we wrap up this semester, thinking about Edward Tyler, who he initially had looked at the origin of religion, and he suggested that the world's first religions were actually the idea of beliefs in spirit beings, what's called animism. So we'll get to that slide in a few minutes as well. So that whole connection of it's not just us, it's not just the humans that exist, and there's other realms of reality, and there's other forms of existence, if you will. So anyway, I think your chapter does talk about E.B. Tyler, but if it doesn't, I'm here to kind of shout out. Anyway, so chapter goes on to talk about that religion usually gives a worldview, a way to think about what sometimes is called a cosmology, which I already mentioned, the idea that this is where we come from, this is how we organize our world, and more importantly, this is where we go after we cease our existence in this world, in this lifetime. So some cultures and religions believe that there's a cycle that you go through, like the cycle of samsara that you find in Hinduism or Buddhism, where this is not your only existence. You've been here before, you might be here again, and it kind of shapes the way that you think about life. Whereas in some Western traditions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, there is one life, there's one physical life, and then there's a whole interpretation of what the afterlife might be, and that many times is based on how you live your physical life here, whether you will reach paradise or go through suffering because of your actions in your real life. So cosmology, worldview, that whole idea of how does religion, how does that belief system organize what life is all about. And sometimes there is a clash because there's individuals that solely rely on scientific explanation and feel that religion doesn't meet the needs of those explanations. But I personally believe that there's two different categories in understanding the world and our existence and our place in it. So anyway, again, getting back to the text and getting back to your chapter, sacred rituals, right? Rituals, behaviors we've looked at all semester long. Actually, this chapter is going to give you a nice review on rites of passage, so you'll already know that information. So this is an interpretation of rituals, of behaviors that are both practical, meeting the needs of the individuals, and many times when you think of religious practice, whatever you're doing, an offering, a prayer, a sacrifice, it's usually because you're trying to meet a particular need. I want my loved one to be well. They're ill. I want them to be well, so I will pray the rosary or whatever it might be. But also religious behavior is very symbolic because, again, in using the images and the belief, the reenactment and the display of these elements and entities in the belief system reinforce their meanings. And so you often see that rituals will have some type of symbolic or outward display, whether it might be a sequential ritual, like if you think of a Catholic Mass, where you know exactly what's going to happen at every moment, and it all has meaning and significance. Whether you look at sacred space, where the rituals take place, you have here a Buddhist altar here on the right of your screen, again, filled with symbolism and imagery. Or on the left, Dia de los Muertos celebration, which is very much tied into ancestor worship. So sacred rituals, the goal is to allow people to make that connection with the spirit world, and many times it's tied to different beliefs and practices, entities, and different interpretations of what that might mean. Am I just putting out a prayer? Am I involved in spirit possession? Another little topic we'll talk about in a few minutes. It can include many, many different things. So your text talks about religious speech specifically, which is just thinking about how we might verbally kind of have our connection and our relationship with the spirit world. Invocations, prayers, prophecies, songs, praise. Much of our worship is tied into song, reaffirming those sacred words, those sacred texts that are powerful means of transmitting messages about the world, and also how the world was created. So you have this kind of reaffirming of belief when you have religious speech. There is, in Catholicism, there's a prayer that says, I believe, and it's basically going through, this is everything that I believe as a Catholic. So it's pretty straightforward here, and you have many interpretations of what religious speech might be, and you guys might be familiar with that. Spirit beings and forces, a big part of the chapter as well, looking at beliefs tied to what they call animism and animatism. So two different things. Animism is the belief in spirits, in souls. This is what Edward Tyler was saying that early humans had when we look at maybe rock art of 30,000 years ago, that there was a belief that we weren't alone. Animatism is a belief that things, places, are endowed with some type of energy or spirit. So think of people that go on pilgrimage to sacred sites. Think about people that have certain aspects or charms, amulets, things that they hold dear that for them might have a energy of protection or solace. So animatism is tied to the belief that things can have kind of spirituality. And animism is there's a belief in spirits around the world. We see this, I just have an example here of the Kachina spirits, which you find in the American Southwest, the Pueblo peoples, and these are spirits that are often tied to animal spirits, totem spirits, which I'll talk about in just a second. Very important in ritual, in healing, and again, having this notion of spirits around us. The text also talks about different interpretations of gods, polytheistic traditions, polytheism, a belief in multiple deities. The ancients, Egyptians, Romans, Greeks, you name it, were obviously polytheistic. Sometimes we interpret Hinduism as polytheistic, and then monotheist, right? The belief in one God and one deity, and you find Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Sikhism as having that kind of belief. So the text will make those distinctions, which I think some of you might already be familiar with that. Ancestor worship is also mentioned in the text, and some of you might be familiar with this idea. The importance of ancestors, the idea that your loved ones don't just leave, our physical world and their physical life, but they transition to another status in your family. And as spirits, they're protectors, and they're still part of your living life. So rituals, observations, Day of the Dead is a great interpretation of that, blending that Catholic All Souls and All Saints Days beliefs with ancient Aztec beliefs of ancestor worship, and you have this amazing ritual that has continued on. And you see this all over the world. You see this in Asia and South Asia. Many, many rituals are tied to honoring ancestors, the tomb sweeping ceremonies, and so many things. So ancestor worship is a big part of animism. Another part of this kind of dynamic, another example is mana. And mana is a fascinating illustration of how individuals think of animatism, the belief that there are spirits kind of endowed in people or animals or living things or objects. And I just gave you the example of using amulets and charms. Many of us wear religious symbols, a crucifix, maybe a Star of David, you have Hand of Fatima there, maybe something more contemporary, four-leaf clover, and we have the belief that these particular symbols or items have power that can protect, that can assist, that can give us positive energy. And so I'm sure while most of you might not all be religious, but maybe all of you can relate to this concept of mana. And this is different than the notion in biblical manna from heaven. This is a different interpretation. But think about the things that you have. Maybe you have a lucky pencil that you use when you take exams. Maybe there is a particular people that play organized sports do this. If you've been very successful wearing a piece of article of clothing, you'll continue to wear that piece of clothing because you think that it's bringing you good luck. It's enhancing your success. And so that idea of mana is tied into that as well. It's really interesting. It's really fun. Animal spirits, the belief in totems is also mentioned in your book, and we talked about this probably months and months ago in the beginning of the semester when we looked at Franz Boas, his work amongst the Kwakiutl in the Northwest Coast, that idea where individuals believe that collectively they are descendants from spirit beings. And many times there's animal spirits. And so when you look at Native American groups of North America, many of their belief systems are tied to that notion that they collectively are descendants from a particular animal spirit that has particular characteristics. And totems are these beautiful carved tree trunks made of wood, obviously, that depict the various totems of the various clans and the groups. So the belief in animal spirits is very big around the world as well. Chapter goes into religious practitioners, so different interpretations, mediums, diviners, divination, individuals that take time to foresee future events. Healing, we don't often think of healing in the Western scientific world as being tied to belief in spirituality, but many places around the world, healing is essential. It's an essential part of the belief system, and it's not just relying on pharmaceuticals or Western medicine. I have a picture of Amma. I often talk about her in my classes. She is a healer from India who heals through touch. She believes that the nurturing maternal energy that she gives off allows the possibility to heal those that visit her. And she'll go through and hug hundreds of people, hundreds of thousands of people actually, in one visit as she tours the world and as people visit her ashram. So there's different interpretations of religious practitioners. Anthropologically, we usually look at shamans. Shamans in the traditional context of societies. Usually shamans are spiritual guides, practitioners, healers, medicine man or woman. You might have heard of these terms. Individuals that, take on that role to assist their community, many times having had a calling to this role or an apprenticeship, learning how to use herbs, learning how to contact the spirit world through altered states of consciousness. So shamanistic traditions are widespread all over the world. Your textbook talks about a couple of examples. The Mudang, which is a Korean shaman, a female shaman, that's kind of interesting to look at, so you might want to look at that as well. And then, of course, priests, which we're very familiar with in the West and kind of formalized, organized religions, full-time religious practitioners who lead religious organizations and officiate rituals. We might even take that. That definition wouldn't be just for priests, but I'm even thinking, pastors, rabbis, they take on that role where their education and their livelihood is dependent on their role in their congregation. Religious practices, again, we've kind of talked about these things in terms of rites of passage. If you remember Arnold van Gennep, the 4 life stages, birth, initiation, marriage, and death. I think this chapter focuses on puberty rituals and funerary rituals, but that whole idea of, behavior tying into your worship and tying into the important aspects of your belief system. Prayer is a clear example of religious speech. Sacrifice is mentioned. Often offerings are given in thanks or in need. Sacrifice can be, giving a monetary donation to your church or your congregation on Sundays. Anthropologically, we often think of sacrifice as being something a little bit more intense, sacrificing an animal, for example, or the ancient human sacrifice, let's say, of the Aztecs. It doesn't always have to be that gruesome. Sacrifice can just be when we give up, chocolate for Lent or something like that. It's an observance of your religious belief and practice. Healing and curing, like I mentioned, many times a huge part of religious practice. Spirit possession, sometimes you see in practices, let's say, like Afro-Caribbean traditions, Santeria, Haitian Voodoo, Lukumi. These are situations where people have a very intimate relationship with the spirits. And usually within the community, there's somebody who has an ability to really connect with the spirit world. And so basically they let go of the ego of themselves and allow the spirits to take over their body to bring the message out, to heal or to give lessons. Sometimes these spirit possessions are induced through trance, drumming, chanting, music, things of that nature. The textbook also talks about magic and witchcraft, and very, very limitedly. It's very difficult to kind of talk about such a huge topic in anthropology in a one-slide, discussion. I do teach a class on magic, witchcraft, and religion in the fall, which we really get into these topics. But these, again, are other types of religious behavior. And the West and contemporary pop culture and society has often interpreted witchcraft as a negative thing, involving with negative forces and evil, if we want to use that term, which is not necessarily the case. Witchcraft has many different meanings throughout the world, many different cultures. In our own culture, we have a revival of traditional nature-based religions, sometimes called neo-paganism or Wicca. Magic is very interesting because in my class, I actually suggest that we all use magic. Magic is the basis for all religious practice because it's basically behavior that we do to interconnect with the spirit world. So your text talks about imitative magic and contagious magic. Imitative magic is the idea of like causes like. So the very stereotypical ideas, if you think of New Orleans voodoo, where you make a voodoo doll in the likeness of somebody. Many times dolls are used in voodoo practice, but usually they're healing dolls. They're not to harm somebody. Hollywood has really taken that form and that idea and distorted it. Contagious magic is coming into contact. So many times, for those of us that are Catholic, we go into church, and the first thing we do is we dip our fingers in the holy water, and we touch it, and then we put it on ourselves. So that touching is we're coming into contact with something sacred. When you take the Eucharist, another great example of contagious magic. Anytime there's some kind of contact into something that is considered sacred or tied to your belief system, that's contagious magic. So these things, I think, will be recognized in our everyday lives as well. Finally, and this will be my last few slides, I don't want to get too long here, the origins and the functions of religion, thinking about early religions, interpretations of early cave art and Paleolithic art, suggesting some type of magic, looking at maybe more recent Neanderthal burials, intentional burials, suggesting there was a sense of the afterlife, perhaps. So most anthropologists suggest that there's clear indications why religion makes sense. If you want to take Malinowski's view, functions in societies, explaining the world, gaining a sense of control. Again, prayer and belief is a big way to take control of things that you have no control over. Someone is ill in your family, for example. You are not a surgeon, you are not a doctor, there's nothing you can do, but your belief system allows you to pray and to do something, and now you have a sense of control over the situation to try and remedy the situation. Solace, healing, emotional release, that's a great example, and many people often interpret the idea of why religion is important, the idea of hope, of giving hope. And then finally, social cohesion, so that idea of communitas that has been brought up in different interpretations of ritual and the feeling of community, of bringing community together. Many times that's tied to religious practice. Social control, if you want to take a Marxist point of view. Religion historically has been used to control and kind of tell people what to do. These are the rules to live by, whether it's the Four Noble Truths, whether it's the Ten Commandments. It is a method of social control. And of course, as we said before, establishing a cosmology, a worldview. So this is where I'm going to stop my discussion on religion. I hope this helps you get through the chapter and through the material. Religion is, I think, one of the most fascinating aspects of anthropology. There's so much diversity and interesting aspects tied to it. I hope most of you take this little morsel that I'm giving you and expand your curiosity as you have throughout the semester to look at different practices from a cultural, relativistic point of view, of course. And I look forward to seeing some of you in my religion course in the fall. So thanks, guys, and good luck studying. Bye.